First question, on a scale of 1 to 10, and I've been told 10 is most important, with the many city priorities you will face as mayor, where do you rank the Great Salt Lake and why? The threatened Great Salt Lake ranks as a top priority. That would be a 10. The complete desiccation of the Great Salt Lake would be devastating to Salt Lake City residents and businesses because metals including antimony, copper, zirconium, and arsenic from the dry lake bed will blow into the city, resulting in heightened risks of severe respiratory illnesses, heart disease, lung disease, and cancers. The cascading effects would undermine and perhaps entirely destroy our neighborhoods, economic vitality, and overall quality of life. The dust could lead to degradation of soil and speed snowmelt, shortening winter sports seasons and reducing water supply later in the year. It would severely damage valuable wetlands, eliminate brine flies, which are vital in the ecosystem, devastate the conditions upon which brine shrimp, which add $10 to $60 million to our economy, can exist, and threaten millions of migratory birds. As Candace Hassenjager, director of the Utah Division of Water Resources, stated, protecting and preserving the Great Salt Lake is a top priority for the state. The lake is vital to the environment, ecology, and economy, not just in Utah, but also to the western United States. See the January 13th, 2023 Smithsonian Magazine article entitled Drying Great Salt Lake Could Expose Millions to Toxic Arsenic-Laced Dust. Question number 2. What's your plan for assisting in saving the Great Salt Lake? What actions will you take to ensure more water makes it to the lake in the future? I would change policy and practices dramatically, making it clear to the public this is an urgent matter of life and death for many of us, as well as for our beloved city. Although individual conservation efforts are important for dealing with droughts generally, the Great Salt Lake will survive only if far less water is diverted for agricultural purposes. Under my leadership, Salt Lake City will create a coalition with surrounding communities to pursue legal remedies, legislation, and public policy changes to protect the public interest in water conservation. Additionally, as I have done at my own home, turf should be eliminated or minimized. We should do everything possible to create a public and personal ethic of water conservation, including advertising campaigns and public challenges, raising awareness of the disastrous impacts of continued poor stewardship of the Great Salt Lake. I would also restore Salt Lake City's position as an international climate protection leader, as when I was mayor before. See our campaign website at rockyformayor.com under Environmental and Smart Growth Leadership. We have been on notice for many years that continued reliance on burning fossil fuels will lead to a significant decrease in the water volume of the Great Salt Lake and dangerously high salinity, threatening brine shrimp and flies. Effective, urgent action is crucial. Third question. What actions have you taken in the past to help protect the lake? The Great Salt Lake is at risk in large part because of the climate crisis. As Utah scientists stated in a 2007 scientific consensus report, which is found online, if you look under Utah Scientific Consensus Climate Change, They stated, quote, as temperature increases, expected declines in mountain snowpack will likely lead to lower average lake levels and increased average salinity unless average winter precipitation increases. I participated on the Governor's Blue Ribbon Advisory Council on climate change, which led to the above-referenced scientific report. Salt Lake City won the World Leadership Award in London for our innovative environmental programs, and I received the EPA's Climate Protection Award. We reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 31% in city operations in 3 years. To expand our successes globally, I presented in several nations and in numerous states on how our successes could be replicated by other cities. A video I prepared regarding effective leadership on climate protection can be viewed on the Rocky 4, that's number 4, Salt Lake City YouTube channel under the title Climate Crisis Leadership. For 3 years, I joined with Robert Redford and ICLEI, on whose board of directors I was a member, to host dozens of mayors to learn about the climate crisis, municipal best practices for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and how best to communicate about climate issues to local residents. Question number 4. How do you view the inland port projects and the impact it may have on the lake? The inland port project, as well as the alarming satellite port projects, raise tremendous concerns for the lake and its surroundings. The proposed port will deteriorate our air quality, increase greenhouse gas emissions, create noise and light pollution with an expanded rail and trucking infrastructure, exacerbate our already congested traffic, severely damage precious wetlands, and harm critical wildlife habitats surrounding the Great Salt Lake, home to millions of birds representing over 200 species. As I stated for a March 7, 2022 Salt Lake Tribune article on the inland port entitled Such a Horrible Idea on So Many Levels, former SLC Mayor Rocky Anderson rails against the inland port. The inland port is a creation by people who oftentimes simply bow down to developers who have a lot of short-term money to bank off projects like this without any consideration for the long-term negative effects or the impacts to the public interest for generations. This is such a horrible idea on so many levels. For a democracy to work, people need to know what their government is doing. And right now, I don't think most people have any idea about who is bound to benefit from the inland port. Close quote. Next question. What do you want residents under your watch to do to help save the lake? We each have a responsibility to live sustainably and protect the environment, as I have by taking transit, driving low or no emission vehicles for 22 years, having zero turf at my home, and relying solely on solar power with surplus electricity added to the grid. The city has a responsibility to support conservation by educating and setting an example. Sprinklers running full blast on Washington Square during rainstorms will not happen when I'm mayor. Our government officials need to walk the talk. To achieve necessary changes for saving the Great Salt Lake, we must recognize that even if every household permanently stopped watering lawns, that would not be a major factor in saving the Great Salt Lake. While alfalfa farming represents only 0.2% of the Utah economy, it uses 68% of available water. The most critical action that residents can take is to effectively push their elected officials and other policymakers at every level of government to take necessary measures immediately to sufficiently reduce the diversion of water for agricultural purposes. Besides the measures described in response to the next question, we should all vigorously oppose the proposed Parley's Canyon mine, which will use significant amounts of water to suppress dust. Next question. What should the state and federal government do to help save the lake? The greatest threat to the Great Salt Lake is the diversion of water for agricultural uses, particularly alfalfa farming, which uses 68% of available water. The state and federal government can save the lake by prohibiting unnecessary agricultural crops like alfalfa, which comprises only 0.2% of our economy. About 1/3 of alfalfa grown in Utah is exported to China at tremendous environmental and humanitarian costs to our state. Utah and the federal government should set 2 concrete mandatory goals. 1, curb water consumption in the state by 1/3 to 1/2, allowing 2.5 million acre-feet of water to travel into the Great Salt Lake from streams and rivers for at least 2 years. 2, bring the elevation of the Great Salt Lake surface to 4,200 feet above sea level. The Utah legislature should also update water laws and eliminate the use it or lose it policies that contribute to water waste. The Utah legislature should also preempt local laws that require residents and businesses to have turf. The Utah legislature needs to finally recognize the findings of the 2007 Scientific Consensus Report written by top Utah scientists and end the support and encouragement for fossil fuel use and extraction throughout the state. Next question. Because treated wastewater is an important source of water to Great Salt Lake, in some cases, water recycling and water conservation methods that are effective elsewhere can actually decrease the flow of water to the lake. What initiatives do you envision for encouraging sustainable water use while also protecting the supply of water to Great Salt Lake? Water recycling, which is a diversion of water that would otherwise flow to the Great Salt Lake, could decrease the depth of the Great Salt Lake by 10 feet or more. The Utah legislature passed legislation restricting water use in future developments in northern Utah. It should restrict water reuse of any sort, anywhere the water would otherwise eventually flow to the Great Salt Lake. Instead of responding to the market for treated wastewater, reselling for profit, the city should dedicate the water rights in perpetuity to the Great Salt Lake. While the Utah Constitution may currently prohibit this, legal pressure needs to be imposed on the state legislature to ensure that we support the Great Salt Lake for the future, or the viability of the largest region in Utah will be at enormous risk. Next question. How would the depletion of the Great Salt Lake affect the future of your city? The depletion of the Great Salt Lake would severely undermine the quality of life in Salt Lake City. Residents will leave to avoid the high risk of poisoning, adverse health effects, and continued declines in property values. The poor air quality in the Salt Lake City area decreases lifespans on average by about 2 years. The depletion of the Great Salt Lake will ensure even shorter lives. Salt Lake City will not be able to attract and will lose businesses. Regional recreation and economic drivers like winter sports will wither because of early snowmelts. Our city will be irrevocably altered, much like what is anticipated with the ongoing desiccation of Lake Urmia in Iran. The dreaded complete desiccation of Lake Urmia poses a significant risk of mass migration from the region. The same dangers are posed by the desiccation of the Great Salt Lake. As one environment official said in an article in Al Monitor, headlined "Lake Urmia Risks Fully Drying Up," Iran wetlands chief, Iran's Lake Urmia will dry out completely if rescue efforts are not prioritized over the needs of farmers in the drought gripping the region. We must prioritize rescue efforts in relation to the Great Salt Lake over the needs of farmers. Next question. What does sustainable development mean to you? And what do you see as your role in ensuring that future development is sustainable? Sustainable development is an approach that meets today's needs while protecting the interests of future generations, nurturing the health of our planet. The goal is to ensure well-being for all living things and the environment now and in the future. My role as mayor will be to approach sustainability issues in the same way I did during my 8 years in office. Sustainability was at the heart of all we did. We kept and will keep foremost in mind the seventh generation principle of the Iroquois. Quote, "The decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future." My history as mayor demonstrates concrete successes. For instance, a 31% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from city operations, based on a pragmatic, visionary commitment to sustainability. I will restore Salt Lake City to being a national and international leader on climate protection and restorative justice. I will preserve and expand open spaces in our city, not allowing development to destroy it as at present. I will aggressively fight against sprawl development. I will fight in every way to make an emergency response to the Great Salt Lake crisis a priority over the interests of farmers, particularly those growing alfalfa. Last question. What is your personal relationship/history to the Great Salt Lake? The Great Salt Lake has been ever present in my life. I've been on the lake sailing and always moved by the beauty and magnificent presence of the Great Salt Lake. As with the looming spectacular mountains surrounding us, the Great Salt Lake feels like a dependable old friend. My relationship with the Great Salt Lake has been far more intense since I first learned about the threat of a major disaster facing our region because of a long-time failure to exercise wise, informed stewardship of the lake and its water sources. The lake has now become a driving passion of mine, not unlike my obsession with the climate crisis for over 30 years. I will do whatever it takes, including mobilizing young people and others, to save our Great Salt Lake and not allow those who have dithered thus far to put our city and its residents at risk of disaster because of short-term interests in alfalfa farming. Those who have the power to make a real difference must be effectively persuaded to prioritize the urgent need to return the Great Salt Lake to its safe water volume over the interests of farmers whose water use has led to the imminent threat of devastation for all of us. Thank you very much.